What's going on, everyone? So Gary Trent Jr.'s time with the Toronto Raptors appears to be coming to an end. The Toronto Raptors offered, supposedly based on reports, roughly $15 million a year for a contract. He wanted more. He wanted 18.5 plus million, and now he's trying to figure out what to do. Right, him and Clutch, they are looking for other options. A lot of reports say that he'd be lucky to get even a full mid-level exception. More likely than not, is probably the taxpayer mid-level exception, and may end up even having to sign a vet minimum for a year. But supposedly, again, based on reports, he's not completely against the idea of kind of just using a season to kind of build up his reputation, build up his rep, and potentially use that as a way to get more salary elsewhere. His stock has kind of dropped the last year or so. I think a lot of that has to do with the Toronto Raptors. I don't think it's necessarily him. I just think you look at the first few years he was there, right? And got there. He was excellent for them. I think it was 2-3 years ago. He led the league in 30-point games, right? He was really good for just the Toronto Raptors in his first tenure. I mean, you look at the first 2 years there, he averaged 16.2 in 17 games after he got traded there. And then the first full year, he played 70 games, averaged 18.3 points. He had an EFG of 51.1%, shot 45% from 2-point range, and shot 38% from 3-point range on 8 attempts. And then in the following year, he averaged 17.4 points per game and still maintained 37% 3-point shooting on 6.8 attempts per game and shot 50% from 2-point range. Had an EFG of 52.2%, so actually was more efficient overall, but also got fewer attempts that following year. And then again, his attempts last year went down even further, played 71 games, was coming off the bench for 41 of those 71 games, and went from 14.2 attempts to 11.9 attempts, shot 40% from 3-point range on 6.4 attempts per game, 46.4% on 2-point attempts on 5.5 a game, and then dropped to 13.7. So his stock is currently lower, but this guy is a legit 3-and-D 2-guard. He can play 3 in some spots, but probably best at the 2-guard position. And this is where I think, the obvious choice appears to be the Los Angeles Lakers, right? So the Lakers seem to be the team that he's interested in, kind of waiting around for. The Lakers are reportedly interested in Gary Trent Jr. as well, and more likely than not, if the Lakers free up a roster spot and can bring him on, he's probably going to go to Lakers, also being a Clutch client, right? He has that inherent way in. But outside of the Lakers, I think the San Antonio Spurs make a lot of sense. I really like what the Spurs have done this offseason, bringing in Chris Paul, bringing in Harrison Barnes, right? You got these 2 vets. And the San Antonio Spurs now have 2 roster spots open and 2 two-way contracts. Who are you bringing in with those 2 roster spots? You're either going one of 2 routes. I guess technically there'd be 3 routes, but more likely than not, one of 2 routes. You're either A, you're looking to go and bring in a young talent that has some potential and upside that maybe you can kind of grow and develop and be a quality rotation piece at worst for you. The other alternative is you go and you bring in another vet guy who can kind of continue to add and be a mentor and help with development of your young guys. And then the third option would be maybe you just do a trade to where you're getting some assets and you're taking a contract on or something, right? But other than that, why not go with a Gary Trent Jr., who is proven in this league? This is a guy that go get you 18 a game. He's done it with the Raptors, right? But not just that, he's still very young. He's 25 years old, right? So you could bring him in at 25 years old, right? So he kind of fits the timeline with this roster, with this team, gives you some insurance for a potential trade, right? There's a lot of talks about them potentially trading Keldon Johnson, right? If you do eventually later on down the road look to trade for a star, you're probably going to have to give up Vassell. So Gary Trent Jr. might be a guy that would be good just to have, just to kind of see, right? And kind of give you more flexibility and not have the risk of, or the fear of, man, if we lose Vassell or if we lose Keldon, right? Like, now what do we do? Right now we got to go find somebody that can replace him. Well, it's like, okay, well, we got Gary Trent. And I think you add him to, the Chris Paul and the Harrison Barnes acquisitions and then the draft pick in Stephon Castle. And it's, to me, it'd be such a low risk, high reward type move. You're getting a guy that is still very young, that has proven that he could be a legit two-way player in this league, a guy that can go get absolute buckets, a guy that can, knock down the catch and shoot, knock down the mid-range, do a little bit of everything, create for himself, create a little bit for others, him alongside Chris Paul, right? You want shooting. You want guys that can put the ball in the hoop. And Gary Trent Jr., I think, would be a guy that could do that. And again, you're talking such low risk, high reward. You're not going to be paying him $15 to $20 million a year. You're bringing him in on probably, a vet minimum, maybe a little slight higher. Maybe you're bringing him in on $5 million a year or something like that. And he can be a quality piece off the bench, right? It's like he would be immediately one of the Spurs' better players, right? Like, again, this is a guy that I think as his stock has dropped because of Toronto. Right? I think Toronto just was in this influx. They didn't know what they wanted to do. They didn't know where they wanted to go with it, right? Like, they should have rebuilt 2 years earlier, right? And it's like Gary Trent kind of just became the odd man out because they were kind of experimenting, doing all these other things and trying to go with like that big position list where everyone's like 6'6" on the court. And it's like, I just think Gary Trent in a lot of ways was a casualty of dysfunction in Toronto. And I think now it's like, well, now they're going a completely different direction. They got all these young guys. They just had to pay quickly. Like, they're going to have to pay a bunch of other guys. And it's like, do they really want to pay Gary Trent? And it's like, their loss could potentially be your gain. If he could get back to being some type of version that you saw when he first got to Toronto, that could be huge for a team like the San Antonio Spurs. Again, I'm not saying he's a star. I'm not saying he's a superstar. I'm not saying he's going to even be any of those things. But he is a real rotation piece. He is a legit two-way guy. Can knock down the three ball. He can get your own bucket, right? Like, he would be a very quality piece. And again, he'd be one of your better guys immediately. I'm not saying he'd be your best guy or second best guy or anything like that, but he would be a guy that I think could slot in and be, one of your top 5 to 7 players easily. And, would play well and be a nice compliment alongside of Chris Paul. Would be a potential future piece. If it doesn't work out, you just let him go. You sign him to like a 1-year deal to where, you're paying him, like I said, $5 million for a year. If it works, keep him. If it doesn't work, let him go. Let him walk. It's not the end of the world. I look at it and go, like, what else? What are your other options with those? You have to at least bring one guy, and you got to at least carry 14. So, bare minimum, they got to bring in one player. Who is that guy? Yes, maybe you bring in, like I said, a development guy, or you bring in another vet, or you bring in a guy that could be a real rotation piece, that could be a real just roster booster, right? Like, if, the Spurs clearly aren't trying to tank this year, because if they were, they wouldn't have went and signed Chris Paul. They wouldn't have went and brought in Harrison Barnes. Right? They're trying to, at least find that middle ground. I don't think that they're a contender or anything like that, but I think that they're a team that, they want to at least make a push for the play-in. I think Gary Trent Jr. is a guy that would get you that much closer. I think this is a guy that would get you a couple wins that you might have not won otherwise. All right, so anyway, as always, this is a discussion. I pass the question on to you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you like the idea of bringing in a Gary Trent Jr.? Do you think no, stay away from Gary Trent Jr.? Who else would you want besides Gary Trent Jr. that you could bring in on? Because again, you have 2 open roster spots. You have two ways. If you're going to bring in any development guys, you're probably signing those guys to the 2-way deals, right? So who are you bringing in that could potentially be better than Gary Trent Jr.? Right? There's very few guys that actually make more sense than Gary Trent. And I just think Gary Trent is a guy that, again, can kind of raise the ceiling for the Spurs. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, Gary Trent's a guy that now you're winning a championship. Like, he's the missing piece. But I do think he, again, like I mentioned earlier, I think he's a piece that could maybe get you a couple more wins than you might have gotten otherwise. He's a guy that can go on any given night, go drop, 20 to 25. You know, maybe even give you a 30 piece one night when he's feeling it. So I just think it kind of gives you another upside guy that's young, that makes sense. I do think, if more likely than not, he's probably going to the Lakers. But if the Spurs can grab him, I think that'd be good for the Spurs. But anyway, again, how you feel, whatever your thoughts are, love to hear it. So let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. Helps me enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.